Hey there, it's Andre, the Impulsive Thinker. I'm back with Molly Thompson, who her and her husband run Perrysburg Energy. It's a creative energy solutions company that's focused on LED, solar, and energy procurement. And if you're an avid listener, which I thank you for, you'd remember her from episode 153, where she shared her ADHD journey and her recent diagnosis. So thanks again, Molly, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks. Glad to be here.
We were talking one day and you shared something which many of us have experienced, and it was almost like a quandary for you or confusion. Um, and it was that people closest to you not believing that you have ADHD.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be a great conversation to have here because it really touched you, it affects all of us. And I think it's something we definitely need to discuss more. So um, let's just get started. So what
Okay.
was the background on that one?
I think I've had a couple conversations with you as well as a few others about, the getting diagnosed as an adult it was at the same time a very big surprise to me, but also even more so a big relief. Like it
Right. Yep.
really has, it's been life changing for me. For me personally, it's been the biggest gift possibly of my like adult or at least of my career,
Mhm.
because like I have so it gives me so much more to be able to explain why I do the things that I do and who I am. So as I've been sharing this with people, I've decided to be very vocal about it and just share very openly with people because it's important to me to have that transparency. Like we
Yep.
have transparency in our business, and that's just how I am. So it kind of made sense to be open about it when I don't just blurt it out, but when it comes up, if
Mhm.
there's an opportunity, I share about it. So when I shared about it, a lot of people have been like, "Oh, I didn't know that." Or some people, some of my closest friends will laugh and say, "Oh my gosh, I've always known that about you." Kind of in a like, "Well, why didn't you tell me? That would have been useful to
Yeah.
know decades ago." And so there's that kind of funny conversation. But a big surprise was there are a few people, either colleagues or friends and family that I was surprised. It was I guess I could say skepticism, or like, I had one person say, "Well, I don't generally believe in ADHD as a diagnosis." This
Mhm.
was someone I was working with pretty closely for a while, and that was a big surprise. And then I've had some friends and family who just like the reaction is, um, they don't say, "I don't believe you," but like when you're talking to somebody well, you can kind of see when they shut down or when there's skepticism behind it. And I think
Right.
I thought it was surprising because if I went to a family member or a close friend and said, "I have cancer," I don't think they're going to say, "I don't believe you." So I just thought it was surprising to not say, "Oh my gosh, tell me more. Let's talk about it," whatever it was. So I think I started, it was an adjustment period when I found out. And then once I started working through that, it was sort of getting curious. And that's when you and I talked about, like, well, that's interesting. Like, what is that about that you get um, that kind of pushback or that skepticism? So,
Yeah, because I think a lot of skepticism, all like comparing it to cancer or to a physical disease, is I think it's almost not a fair comparison
yeah.
because a disease or an illness, physical illness, it makes sense. Everyone gets that.
Hmm.
But I'm also seeing anything related to mental health, there's
Hmm.
skepticism. So even if you say I got high anxiety, I have depression, there's a lot of people say, oh, we don't believe that, or we don't get, and I think it's a lot has they don't get it. So I think it has a lot to do more on the mental health side, which I think there's two aspects. The
Yep.
people don't get it because they haven't experienced it,
Yep.
or they have experienced it but don't want to admit it because it's still, as much as everyone talks that mental health is it's a big communication, it's all accepting. I find that's bullshit. It's not well accepted. It's just a PR thing being used, but people are still not supported when they talk about their mental health.
Yes.
Right. I got my kids in therapy, and everyone's looking at me cross-eyed. What's wrong with them? What's going on? Like, are you a bad parent? All that. No, I want them to learn how to talk things through their
Right.
emotions. And that's a skill that we've never been allowed to use
Yes.
in the past.
Yep.
I still have parents saying, you're broken, you're fixed, you're going to health. You're embarrassing me because you're going to a psychiatrist.
So you're touching, you're kind of going down the page mentally, like it's ticking a lot of boxes for me. So I think, so first of all, I think there are people who are, for lack of a better phrase, ADHD deniers. Like,
Yeah.
they just don't believe in it. Maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it's how they grew up. Maybe I don't know what it is for them personally, but they don't have it. They don't understand it. And they think that people will just adopt a label as needed. And
as an excuse, not
yes,
an explanation.
100%.
And there's a lot of people that do that, no matter what condition it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I have seen that. And so there is like the victim mentality. There are some people, it's easier and more comfortable to have that label than to maybe do the work, get curious, and find out more information around it.
Right. So that gives them justification not to do something.
Yes. And I do think that. So that's kind of bleeding from the ADHD deniers into like people who they do have something going on, but it's easier to just stop at, okay, I have a label, I'll just stick with that one instead of.
And I just want to add in there, like you said before, like the ADHD deniers, you just don't get it. And you know what? There really is no real way that they can fathom or get an inkling of what ADHD brains do. Depression, everyone gets a hint of depression. Everyone gets anxiety, manic, mania. People can relate to that to a certain extent. But for the ADHD brain, and even with the autistic brain, if you don't live it, you just will never get it or appreciate it.
Right. It is sort of like balance. If you've never had the experience of learning how to ride a bike, you can't have that. It's, the same thing. Like, I'm a big fan of, excuse me, of experiential entrepreneurship. It's the same thing. If you haven't done it, it's really hard to understand what it's like to go through it.
Correct.
Right?
Yes. That's a great analogy with entrepreneurship and the ADHD brain. Good one.
And I have been like, so that to me carries through that experience of balance or the experiential entrepreneurship, whatever that is going through it. So I do think there is that. So there's kind of like the deniers, the victim mentality. But then as I've been exploring this conversation, I said, it's not me, it's you. And I kind of say that sort of half jokingly, but what I got curious about is with people who are hesitant, like now I have this new language and a new framework to explain kind of how I'm wired. And I didn't have that before. And people who have known me for a really long time, friends, family, maybe some coworkers, they've known me to be a certain way. And now I've shifted, like something has changed about like who I am. It's not that I have changed as a person, but now I have this.
You're a lot more free to be yourself and you understand yourself now. And that's very threatening to other people that's used to have the normal Molly.
It makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So when
change.
It is change. And I've gone through that already. When I really substantially changed my lifestyle and changed how I eat and cut back on drinking and all of that. There were a few people who literally, like I had one person who was open enough to say, well, I don't even know how to react to that. So I just stopped inviting you over instead of, and I was like, wow, okay, well, I appreciate the transparency, but that was also very telling of other people and just the insights. It makes them take a look at, wow, she's been able to successfully make this change, and it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah, and there's hopefully I can remember the second one because the short working memory here, but um, the one thing is, it's not me, it's you. That's correct in two ways. It is, I'm going to list them. I'm going to write it down right now. One is, um, they make it about them,
Yep,
right? Make it about them.
100%.
And two is growth mindset. Okay, I'm going to go with because when we were talking in the coffee shop, we are talking about, they make it about them.
Yep.
And I remember as a child, like, I mean, very, very young, I remember my dad always saying, oh, they're going to therapy and they're always blaming the parents. It's always the parents' fault, always the parents' fault. It's always the parents' fault. And that's what a lot of people think. And that's what's happened with my family is that, oh, he's going to therapy. Now they understand this. We missed something. It's fine. I got no problems that you missed it when I was a kid or an adult. But now we know. But now what they do is they twin is, oh, I failed. And they don't want to take ownership of that. So they throw it out as either a denier, or what I was told was, you should have told me as a kid.
Wow.
Right.
Well, yes. So,
and then I've heard a lot of stories about spouses and family members, even adults, say, you should have told me. That's not the point right now.
right.
That's a reaction to, it's about me, and just saying, you know what? I never noticed it. I screwed up. I made a mistake. Oh, well, now we know. Sorry. Move on.
Right. Right. But they don't have the understanding. So there's an element of empathy, right? Like if it's about them, to me, that signals a potential lack of empathy, because if it makes them look bad, then, how there's not an ability to say, wow, like I didn't see that. And it's interesting because, with my kids, one of my kids is going through this right now. And particularly because I got diagnosed, and my daughter is the one who said, like, years ago, Mom, are you sure you don't have ADHD? And I was like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I actually got diagnosed 6 years before my diagnosis last year. And I was like, I don't think that's it. And I went to a functional psychiatrist who said, no, I think it's anxiety. So I went that direction. And now we know it's likely the opposite. Anxiety is an offshoot or a thing of ADHD.
And that's a common misdiagnosis,
Right.
Anxiety, depression, because it's not well known about the ADHD in the adult world, for one.
So my daughter came to me and said, I wonder if I have it.
Runs in the family.
Well, now I know that. But back then, I have to say, I was a little dismissive. So, and I'm okay to admit that now, because, a lot has changed.
Social conditioning.
Yes. Like, it was not the mainstream. And what I knew about ADHD then was very little. So she didn't fit the typical ADHD mold as we know it. Now, when I got my diagnosis, I'm like, you need to get this checked out. And she did. And, what a surprise. She has ADHD. Yeah. So, and she has been advocating for herself. And I just didn't have those tools when I was growing up. Right. So it's interesting that people say, why didn't you say something? Well, if you don't have the tools, you don't know what you don't know. There's nothing to say, because that's not how you're raised or conditioned or taught.
Especially when they made it about them. If it made them look bad, they did whatever in their power is to not look bad.
Yep.
Not get the help. And, like for me, I taught my kids at a young age their strengths. I taught how to advocate for themselves, and they're struggling right now. So I'm giving whatever they can, the tools to improve themselves, because I didn't want them to suffer like I have at my age. So if they can learn these tools at a young age and process their emotions and feelings, because that's what mental health is. So everyone who keeps saying mental health number one, blah, blah, we just got to talk. It's about emotions and feelings and how you handle it. That's what it really is.
Well, and I think there's a whole generation of maybe my parents' age, or whatever, a whole generation, or maybe more than one generation, who were raised that if you go outside yourself for help, you're weak. It's a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
Like mental fortitude.
We had to do everything. Yep.
Right. So that's hard to overcome. Also, I grew up in a very small community, and nonconformity, which I now call neurodivergence, nonconformity is bad. So I have known since the age of 12 that I was different. I thought differently and acted differently from others, but I had to hide it or mask it for decades because I
To
thought
fit in.
that, yeah, to fit in.
To fit in,
Which
be
I
accepted.
still never fit in. It was a wasted effort, but.
And that's what people don't quite understand is we able to fit in and make it look like we fit in, but that's
Right.
very hard on us internally because
Right.
you're living a lie.
So if 90% of my mental energy is fighting against myself, it is exhausting.
Fighting against yourself to fight against society or to the conformity
Right.
rules.
Right. And part of why I'm so vocal about being an advocate for, just people in general, whether it's neurodivergence or whatever it is, it's more of being vocal for self-advocacy. So, it's kind of like, I was a caregiver for my dad before he died. And if he had to go to the hospital, well, he may not have been able to advocate for himself. So I advocated for him. So much in the same way I'm doing that, telling my daughter, if you think something is off, investigate it until you get to the point where you're satisfied. So that's what I'm doing. And going back to, the therapist and then the functional psychiatrist to say, something's wrong. I know this is what you said X number of years ago, but something is not right. I got to figure this out.
Yeah. And I just want to you use the term a lot, self-advocacy lately. I've been using it a lot and it just hit me here. And I want to bring it up to the listeners because you brought it about earlier about the victim mindset, right? The victim thinking. And self-advocacy is not the same as whining or making excuses.
For sure.
So a lot of people here, when they hear self-advocacy, I want to advocate, they think, oh, you're just going to complain. No, because there's a specific language when you're doing self-advocacy. It's explaining, not making it an excuse.
Well, so sometimes you can look at your kids as a reflection of yourself. And, I talk to my daughter about this a lot because we're very open with each other, but it was because she said, Mom, when I first started talking to you about this, you said, oh, that's ridiculous. No, just focus on your schoolwork, whatever that is. But now she knows.
Try harder.
Yeah. No, and I knew that there's no one who tries harder than she does. Yeah. But it was, just keep going and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. So, because I didn't know better. But now that I do, and she has seen me come around and has always known that I am a fan of her advocating for herself. But now she's also, talking to other people who provide what she needs to say. And she just texted me yesterday and said, I'm so proud of myself for all the self-advocating that I'm learning because it's giving her a voice. And I said, I'm so happy for you. And I only wish that I had that. It's not necessarily a regret of mine, but I just look at if I had had that, the gumption or the fortitude about myself to advocate for hey, something is off.
Right. But you didn't know that.
Right. Exactly.
But
so
now but now
right.
you know, and you took action and you provided her a tool.
Exactly.
Right.
And that to me is about confidence. And that's a whole nother conversation.
Right. But that's just taking ownership.
For sure.
You said, you could have easily said, hey, you know what? I haven't known. I just figured it out. Oh, I could have kept it hidden and not deal with it with with your daughter.
Right.
Right. I'm very happy that I took a stand at my kids' young age.
Yep.
To work with them, get their diagnosis done, because by knowing, once you know, everything makes sense and
everything opens up.
Right. And it gives them the confidence and the strength and the ability to be themselves at a younger age than we have been.
And to know, hey, something's off. I got to do something about it.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what
100%.
And that's what I think a lot of people need to realize. Something's not right. Let's look into it. you might
Yep.
look dumb, you might look silly. Sorry, not dumb, but silly. I think there's a lot of people are afraid of they're looking silly. They should have known. But you know what? In the end, now you know. Who cares? And move on.
So, but I actually, what you just touched on, I had a huge fear. Like, I know that I'm a fairly smart person, like I'm fairly bright, but I had this enormous fear growing up of being stupid or
Yeah.
feeling stupid, not being stupid,
Yeah.
feeling stupid, looking dumb. I would never be the first one to raise my hand. I would never sit in the front of the classroom. Like, I had
Right.
this whole, and that's part of like imposter syndrome, but that
No,
was over
that's not
years.
imposter syndrome. That's a whole different conversation. That's just the way you were trained as a kid.
Well, yes. And so,
Like for me, I had no problems raising my hand. I'm a fact finder. I did well in school, so I had no issues answering questions. I had an analytical mind, or I have an analytical mind, and it worked. It fit
mhm,
in the mold. And a lot of people with ADHD, when I didn't fit in the mold, well, I'm also stubborn. So I really didn't care if I was battling with the teachers. But like for what you're explaining to me is the way you thought and talked didn't fit the norm. So you kept quiet.
yeah,
And then you use the term, I think I'm fairly smart. No, you're smart in your
yep,
own way, in your own area. It just didn't fit the mold. And then
right,
that's the challenge. And now the other thing that doesn't fit the mold is a growth mindset, which to me is the point number two about why there's a lot of ADHD deniers. Because a
yes,
lot what you're explaining before was, I know now myself, I've changed the way I am. I'm no longer hiding it. That's making people uncomfortable. It made it
yeah,
about them. But
yep,
it's not only ADHD here. To me, that's the growth mindset. You did that with your daughter.
yep,
So, as an entrepreneur with a growth mindset, you're already different than the norm. So people are going
yes.
to resist you and fight you. And then the people like comfortable Molly, the fun in person, also now wants to grow and make herself better. They're not against that consciously. But what
Hmm.
you're doing is you're unsettling the comfort level everyone had with you. And once there's
Yep,
change, they freak out. And after a while, we
yes.
have to learn if they don't want to grow with you, they made the decision to stay behind where they're comfortable.
And that makes them feel, I don't
That
know, feel bad, or it just
it
makes
makes
them.
them bad. It makes you look, and then you're the arrogant one. You're the show offy, right? They bring it back to you because they made it about them.
So for me, they haven't made me look bad. They just can't get past that it makes them feel bad about themselves. So I
Because
have
they
a
don't
lot
want to
of,
put the effort into it. Also,
right.
yeah,
And it's scary for them to change. And it is way more comfortable to kind of ride it out. So I'm at an age where I have a lot of friends and family who are talking about retirement, and whether they
mm-hmm.
have been crazy successful and retire early, or they're, at that age where retirement is kind of, you're at that age. I don't have any desire to retire, like none, because I feel like I'm not even close to hitting my stride. And that freaks them out
Yep.
because and I even had
Because
someone
that's
very
not normal thinking. You're raised to
right,
retire.
exactly. And I am like, if I retire, I'm going to die. Like, it would drive me insane, and everybody
Yeah.
around me. But to have a close family member or a close friend say, I know that I don't have a growth mindset. First of all, that's a big admission on their part, because I talk about all the time, I'm using words like 10x, that
Yep.
in our world, we understand what that means, but for other people, it's crazy talk. It's like they are like, well, what, that's because they're in a very logical, linear world, and that doesn't make sense. You can't just 10x your life. Like, that doesn't make sense. And I'm like, why not? Who says I can't?
Exactly. Yep.
And, and I think that has a lot to do with, it makes them really uncomfortable, because if they are forced to turn the tables and look in the mirror and shine the light on themselves, then they have to really get up close and personal with, what are they doing? And they just aren't okay with,
Right.
I'm going to just ride it out and sail into the sunset, because I think there are some people who secretly want to be more entrepreneurial, and they have just kind of accepted what they're doing and where they are. So,
Well, and there's not like there's only a certain percentage of entrepreneurs out there for a reason because it's not easy,
right.
it's difficult. Everyone else has their own roles, and we're not saying not being 10x is bad. It's just be true to yourself. If you're a 10xer, go for it. If you're a 2xer or you're okay with what's going on, that's nothing wrong with it. I
Yep.
think that the learning is actually don't hold other people like don't put a bet make someone look bad because they're doing something that you don't want to do or you can't.
Yep.
And a lot of time that's the growth. Like, either you could have taken in the ADHD diagnosis and just say, okay, fine, I'm still going to fit in, I'm still going to play the role,
Hmm.
or say, no, I'm taking ownership of this and moving forward and self-advocating
Yep.
for yourself. So, and especially around the mental health area, it's still a misnomer. It's still a negative discussion as much as it's portrayed as positively, and it's on all PR statements all over the place, but no one does anything about it. Um,
Can
so
I mention
yep.
something here along those lines? So I have been doing a lot of research and looking at different ADHD, like here's something you can do, like, but it's very the solutions are it's still
Normalizing.
very mainstream and not ADHD oriented. Like when you say learn how you learn, like that to me was enormously helpful.
Yeah.
And like be more productive, like do manage your time. That doesn't mean anything to me
No.
because that's the whole thing I've been struggling with for decades is time management or time blindness.
Yep.
So telling me to manage my time is like it's like I'm like that's written by someone who doesn't have ADHD.
Well, and that's the way, because that's a problem for others. You're not fitting the normalization world. You have
Yes.
to work on your time management to fit in. That's
Yes.
why this is the whole point of this podcast, is to break those barriers, because ADHD is still coached out there to fit in.
Yep.
Medication is used so you can fit in. It has
Yes.
nothing to do about the person who needs the help. It's that so you can fit in and make it easier for everyone else.
You know,
And
when
and then
you
and then also, and that's why we need to spin it. And plus, a lot of like a lot of stuff on TikTok, everything you're hearing out there, it's all the stereotypical ADHD stuff.
right.
I don't forget this. I'm lazy, blah, blah. No, motivation's separate of ADHD, and you got to take ownership and mold it. So if you want to do the growth mindset, all that other stuff's not going to work for us because we don't accept it. It's not an
Right.
excuse, it's an explanation, and figure out how to move forward.
What you just said points to something critical for me for the ADHD process. And this is something that I think you and I have talked about, and for sure we talk about in the strategic coach community. And like it's in the Gap and the Gain book with Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, which is the ideal. So the ideal, I mean, that is TikTok. That is every social media outlet is focused on the ideal and be someone you're not.
Yeah.
So I have taken all that stuff off my phone. I don't follow it. I've never been on TikTok. Like I just can't go there because it just makes me feel bad. And on Instagram, I follow things that are really helpful for me and not other people.
Mhm.
So that to me is really important because it's, you have to figure out what your own ideal is.
Yeah. Expertly stated. So what I want the listeners to take away from today is the deniers question why someone's denying your ADHD diagnosis. Is it about them? Is it about that you're actually growing now and you feel they might left behind, or they completely disagree with it because they just don't have the knowledge or the expertise? Um, from what we discussed today is the big thing though you've got to remember is the non-ADHD brain will never get a glimpse or an inkling of what our brain is doing and what we're struggling with. There's nothing for them to figure out or have a taste. So that's one thing I've been communicating is, I'm sorry, you're never going to get it. All I can do is explain it. And I think there's two parts of that denying is the one they make it about themselves because it's a change of comfort, or now it makes them look bad and they got to push that on to you.
Yep.
And that's not your fault. That's their fault. And that's their responsibility, not yours.
Mhm.
So once you figure that out and say there's nothing you can do about it, you have to move on and do so. And not because you have a growth mindset, they may not. And as you grow, and if people don't want to grow with you, they decide to be left behind. Again,
Mhm.
it's not your fault. It's not your responsibility to bring people with you if they don't want to grow with you.
Yep. And there's a phrase that I have learned a number of years ago, eyes on your own plate. I mean, maybe you grew up with that, but for me, as an entrepreneur, as a high achieving ADHD entrepreneur, eyes on my own plate means I'm going to focus on my own results, on my own growth, and on my own life from the standpoint of what's important to me instead of measuring against other people.
And as decided by you.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
So I asked the listeners, have you struggled with this ADHD denier syndrome from close ones? And if so, please let me know. I'd like to hear some stories about this. Thanks again, Molly. This is a good conversation. I think was required to be discussed for our listeners.
Yes. Thank you.
And thank you to the listeners. We'll talk to you soon.